Hello drawing students, this is a demo on line sensitivity. You should have watched the lecture before this demo, and if not, you need to stop this and go watch that. And this will make a lot more sense. So for this, we need the usual suspects, being drawing paper, graphite pencils. You need all your graphite pencils. You need a sighting stick per usual. You will always need a sighting stick. And really important for this assignment as well is a pencil sharpener, because you do need to sharpen your pencils quite a bit to get that detail that you need. This is my pencil sharpener. It's an X-Acto one. You do not need to buy an electric pencil sharpener, but if you have one, this will be very useful for that. But the little metal pencil sharpener that you should have bought with your materials, that'll work great. You just take some patience, but yeah. All right, and then you need a still life, and your still life is very important for this assignment. Notice all the different textures that I have, but what's really, really great for this assignment is something that is organic, and I know that we've done a lot of those, but something that has a lot of detail and a lot of different texture going on. So I also want you to start thinking about spatial sequence so that we don't just have objects on a blank page. So that's why I've put this fabric here, and I'd like you to include a piece of fabric if you can. For that reason, we want the drawing to take up the whole paper. So by that I mean edge to edge, right? All four edges. Now it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have the drawing all the way up top, because the objects are probably going to stop somewhere in here. But we don't just want objects in the middle of the page anymore. I want you to start thinking about spatial sequence, using the whole paper and really showing how things are coming forward, or in the middle, or in the background. Make sure that you have read and understand the requirements for this assignment, and those are on the assignment page. Okay, so that's our setup there. You have to make sure this is set up, and a really strong light source on here is really important. So if you can see here, I have a big light over here. You can definitely see that on this camera here. There is a big light coming from here, pretty strong light source right here. So I know you don't have a big light like I do, but just like a lamp, or if you have a clamp light or something, something from your garage, those work really well. Definitely want a strong light source, and again, that's going to be very useful for you come value, when we do value. Your first step for this drawing is to draw the still life with correct proportions using what you know of sighting. So draw the still life using what you know of sighting, right? And everything that we've used so far in class, those are the tools at your disposal to get correct proportions. You're going to draw this with a light drawing pencil so that later on you can use those other drawing pencils up the scale to add that line sensitivity where it needs to be added. First thing we need to assess too is the orientation of our paper, what the orientation of our paper should be. As you've noticed, I have changed the orientation of my paper to be vertical. Started drawing the drawing and realized that it doesn't look very good horizontal. That's quite all right to restart and have to, reevaluate what the drawing needs to be. So I realized this is going to look much better as a vertical drawing, even though I have an overall horizontal kind of thing going on with the fabric. I want my objects to really be the forefront of the drawing, so I'm going to change this to a vertical drawing to make more sense. The next thing, when this first step, draw the still life using sighting, I'm going to just go ahead and sight all of my axis lines before drawing anything, and I just want to look and see their relationship to each other. So I'm moving around all four objects and really seeing how they relate to each other. And that, without me drawing anything, that is educating me better of how these objects should be placed on the page. So even before I draw anything, we're gonna sight each of our axis lines just lining up the sighting stick and just looking at it in relationship to everything else and seeing how they compare, that's better going to tell you how things should be placed on the paper. So within this step of sighting things, I hope you can see this that I'm doing here, although I am drawing it very lightly so that I can add that line sensitivity later. I just sighted all the axis lines. I'm going to now sight relative proportions. And if you need a refresher on all of this, go back to that sighting multiple objects demo. That's all that we're doing here, is that sighting multiple objects, and then we're adding to that with the line sensitivity. Okay, so I have a general idea of the proportions of each object and the fabric around each object. I've planned things out just pretty generally for right now, and I've drawn it very lightly so that I can move it around even still. A couple things to take note of. If drawing fabric is kind of tricky for you, or you just don't even know where to start, just consider each edge of a fold as a line. How each fold kind of wraps around like this would be a line, or even in here, and how just every little change in the fabric is a line. So, and that includes value shapes as well. So some lines on the fabric will be harsher than others. For instance, like this harsh fold right here would be a darker line, whereas a line that might describe the very soft transition of this value shape right here might be a really light line. So things to think about: the more contrast involved that you're looking at, the darker the line would be. Don't forget about the fabric. Let that help you let that help you plan the composition out. As I was sighting objects, like again, using all those uses of sighting, angles and axis lines, relative proportions, and horizontal and vertical landmarks, I used all of those in here. And as I was doing that, I was looking at the shapes of the fabric to help me plan this out correctly. I could look at a fold and be like, oh, well, that's about here in comparison to this object. So that helped me move things around. I did have to move quite a few things around, and I think a couple more things are going to probably move. But the second step that we are on right now, we are going to spend quite a bit of time to lightly draw the interior and exterior information. So basically what this step is, step number 2, just after you've planned out the composition, after you've planned out relatively the proportions of each object, you're going to spend a lot of time basically planning out your line variation, your line sensitivity. So you're just getting very detailed with a light pencil to give yourself as much information as you can to move forward for that line sensitivity. This might be the longest part of the drawing, and that it's really important. This step and the previous step and the next step, they're all very important. But this one, I want to emphasize that your tendency is to really rush through to the line sensitivity. And it's really important that you slow down and take your time and give yourself as much information before you move away from your 2H pencil or even your H or HB pencil. Before you move away from that planning pencil, really take your time and make sure you have everything correct. Really use a lot of straight line construction. If you took any notice too about how I was holding my pencil during the planning stage, and still probably for a while, I'm holding it at the end. I'm not forcing anything on this pencil. I'm moving about the drawing very freely so that I'm not really forcing anything on the page right away. And when I'm more sure of the drawing, when I'm more sure of the details, then I'll pull out those other pencils. I'll sharpen my B pencils, and then I'll move my hand up on the pencil and be a lot more intentional and very purposeful about my line. Then I'll be a little bit more strict on the way I use my pencil. But for now, when I'm still in the planning stage, when I'm still working much more generally, I'm holding the pencil out here, being a lot more freer about it, using my whole arm still. So again, we're using that general to specific approach. It's very important. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time, a lot more time than what it's going to seem like in the video, planning out this drawing, and really pay attention to how I'm doing that and how much I really do plan out. So I've planned out quite a bit on the drawing. Definitely could plan out some more, but notice how I spent a lot of time planning out all the little words on the squash, on the little, squash gourds. And those are really good for this assignment, if you can get your hands on like some little pumpkins or gourds or something. It's just a lot of information to really put some nice line sensitivity on, but they are pretty detailed, so it took me a long time to really plan a lot of this out. And I will say that like this isn't like photographic to that. I could get it photographic, but I got it as close as I'm comfortable with, and I know when I go to put my line sensitivity in, I know about where the line's gonna go. But that is what that whole step was. I spent at least an hour on that, and I would have liked to have spent quite a bit longer. Do not rush your way through that step, and really make sure that you plan out your line. So basically it does seem like it's pretty slow, and that's okay. What you really need to be doing is really observing the still life, observing each object and the texture and the makeup of each object and the drapery, and you really need to observe and translate that. Take your time to move things around. Just really slow down and do that. So I'm to the point where I can start pulling out some darker pencils. So far I've only used my HB pencil, and I would suggest that you only use your 2H pencil for all of that planning. So for steps 1 and 2, just use your 2H, and don't put any pressure on the pencil. Don't try and make that pencil any darker than it is. And now I think I'll probably start to pull out some B pencils. I'm going to sharpen them as I use them, and then start to apply lines. So review from the lecture. The 3 qualities of line are the value of the line, the thickness of the line, and the texture of the line. So the value meaning the darkness or lightness of the line. So far I have a lot of light lines going on in the drawing. So we're thinking about the darkness or lightness with regard to value, the thickness or thinness of the line, and then the roughness or the smoothness of the line with regard to texture. So for instance, where I have a really sharp highlight, I'm going to have a really dark, thick and sharp line, or where there's a really definite definition of the object, where like there's a really stark fold or stark contrast in the object, or maybe the exterior edges of the object will be thicker and sharper lines. I'll use softer lines to describe the very soft transitions of value in the drapery, or even the soft transition of values in the gourds. These are pretty complicated objects, and it's great if you choose to do something like that. Just know that gourds have these edges that kind of jut out, and they have planes that kind of jut out from them. So just know that you have several lines that make up those jutted out things. But they also have these really cool warts, and they're really ugly and beautiful. So that's why I like to draw them for stuff like this. So again, those are the qualities of the line. So that's value, that's thickness or thinness, and that's the texture of the line. And then we want to apply those qualities of line using those 6 applications we talked about. So the light source, right? So I'm thinking about this really stark light source that's coming from this direction. So where the light is really bright on the objects, here I'm going to use a very light, maybe even an implied line, where the line fades away but then connects again on the other side. That's to show that the light's really bright right there. And probably I'll save that for this edge of the pumpkin that's really close to the light. That's the closest object to the light, so I might just do that. Then we have the spatial sequence, right? So that's things in front will be have more contrast, more detail than the things in the back. It's also partly why I put these objects in the front, because I wanted to have a lot of detail in those. Weight and tension, we're thinking about where objects are sitting. Do we have an occlusion shadow? Again, we'll pick that back up with value, but that's at the very bottom of the object. There will be a nice thick dark line that might even just give way to a kind of a larger value shape for that weight and tension. Overlap, I'm thinking about when objects are in front of other objects, so that means that exterior lines will intersect with the exterior lines of an object right behind it. So then I have to differentiate between those lines, and so a darker line on the object in front will help to differentiate that. So that's what overlapping is talking about. Strength of an edge, how I was kind of mentioning before, how I might give the exterior lines of the exterior contours of the object. So that meaning the exterior contours of the objects are the very outside lines of the object. Maybe I'll have those a little bit darker than the rest on the inside, especially if I have a lot of detailed lines going on. So that would help to differentiate that object from everything else around it. And then focal point. So that's if I decide, okay, I want a focal pointed area, and probably what I'm going to do is have the focal point be these two guys, these two gourds right here, and that's also because they're in front, so that would make sense to have more detail, more contrast with those. So again, we have the 3 qualities of line: value, thickness, and texture, but then we also have the 6 applications of those qualities. So that's light source, weight and tension, spatial sequence, strength or force of an edge, overlapping, and focal point, right? So we're thinking about all of those when we're drawing our drawing. And it's not that we have to use every single thing in every single line. It's that we're using all of those interchangeably. And it's not even that every single one of those has to be present in the drawing. But it helps to answer those questions of, well, what do I do when I put my line down? Well, then you're thinking about all those things. So that helps educate how you're placing those lines. But just start by bringing clarity to the drawing by taking out a B pencil, like literally just a B pencil, not 2B necessarily, and just bringing clarity to the lines, to the sketchy lines that you drew. And then that's the first thing I'm going to do. And then as you bring clarity and as you kind of clean the drawing up, then things will start to focus in and you'll be able to really add that nice detail. So watch as I do that. So I'm going to call it quits for this demo. Although the drawing is far from finished, I will continue to add some line weight to this, and then I'll add that image to the end of the video. But I am about to run out of space on all of my cards, and I've been at this for a couple of hours now. So again, the first step that we're doing is that we are drawing the still life with correct proportions using citing. And so everything from the previous classes, that's what we're using to do that. And so we're just building right off of that. So basically we're starting at the end of citing with multiple objects and we're going forward with that. So we're spending a lot of time to get correct proportions with that. And so that was, citing with axis lines, citing angles, citing proportions, citing space between objects, and citing horizontal and vertical points of alignment. I did all of that to get the drawing, to get the objects on the paper correctly. And then step number 2 is we lightly draw the interior and exterior information. Basically, you're planning for line sensitivity. And that took me quite a while as well. Should take you at least a couple of hours to do that well. That is just planning everything out so that you know exactly where you're going to put that line. And that sometimes means that you're moving proportions around as well. So you're kind of moving back to step 1 just a little bit, but it's all in that planning stage, and you're spending quite a bit of time doing that, again, with a light pencil, and we're not putting any pressure on that pencil so we can move the things around. I took a picture of where I kind of ended with that step, so you can kind of see, what at the end of step 2 should relatively look like. And then to move forward to the end, step 3, which is the whole line sensitivity, just adding line sensitivity. So applying what we've learned about that, and that is the 3 qualities of line being the value, the thickness, and the texture of the line, and then applying that with the 6 applications that we've learned. Light source overlapping, weight and tension, spatial sequence, strength of an edge, and a focal point. Just one last thing I do want to add about how I applied the line with the gourds was that I was really paying attention to all of the little warts in here, but I was also paying attention to the value shifts and the color shifts. So I do have lines indicating the color shifts here, and that just adds more interest to the drawing, and it helps to make the drawing look more realistic, more like the objects in front of you. So really you're looking at every little thing that can indicate what the object is that you're drawing. Now, like I said, I didn't get nearly as far as I'd like, and I'll add some more to this, but the end result should be a very contrasted image that has all types of line in it. So we don't just want dark line, right? We don't just want one thickness or one dark line. No, we want light lines in there as well. We want a nice fluid contrast between really dark and light lines. We want soft and hard lines, and we want thick and thin lines. We want all of that in the drawing. That's what line sensitivity is. That's what line variation is. Remember those terms being interchangeable. However, really line sensitivity is talking about the sensitive application of the line. Line variation is talking about we want all of the variation of the line in the drawing. So we do not just want one quality of line. We want all of it present. I caught myself trying to change all of my light lines, my planning lines, into dark lines, and that's a tendency that you'll find yourself into, but you want to be very specific on where you're laying that dark line. You'll end up making more work for yourself anyway if you try and put dark line too much. Just keep that in mind. That is what I'll be thinking about when I'm grading the work, is does it actually have line variation? Does it have line sensitivity? Are all of the line qualities present and applied where it makes sense? So we're building off of drawing with correct proportions, and we're moving forward, and we're building off of what we've already learned. All right, I am excited to see what you're gonna draw. Again, remember the things I told you about how we're setting up this still life and the kinds and types of objects that we're putting in there. Remember, we do want the drawing to take up the whole paper. I do have lines going from all 3 edges here. I left this open, so that's okay too, but we just want to fill the paper. We do not just want objects in the middle of nowhere. We want it to make sense. Another thing I should add that I forgot to mention at the beginning was that I did add this little like cube here. There's a block underneath this drapery that helps to provide height to your still life. So think about that. I am starting to grade you on how you put together your still life. We want different heights as well as different sizes of objects. So I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, but I notice how the heights are changing between those objects, and that creates for a more interesting composition. So to help you do that, you can get just a small box, put that underneath, put that down first, then drapery, so like a blank white sheet, and then 3 to 4 different objects. Again, if you do the 3 to 4 different objects, you do need 2 of those drawings done. And if you do more than that, or up to 7 or 8, you can do just the 1 drawing. But so a lot of work ahead of you, and yeah, I'm excited to see what you do. If you do find some gourds like this, these are pretty, timely for fall, very fall-y. So yeah, all right, I am excited to see what you guys draw. A lot of work ahead of you.